Well, I was really moved to come here, very much so after everything that happened here. And I was really happy when Pat and I communicated about that, and that the dates, especially with the book fair, so we call it? Festival. Was just now, and I looked at my calendar and I said, I actually could do it. I flew in from California yesterday, and I'm leaving Thursday morning for New York, and then Friday for my next adventure. So it just fit, and I was so happy really to be here. And what I was thinking about talking about, so as not to replicate what I'll say tomorrow night. Should tomorrow night happen? You never know. I was telling someone in the car that I was teaching in Washington, D.C. once, and there was an inch of snow projected. And then they started making announcements about carpooling. And I said, I'm from New England. We don't carpool when there's an inch of snow. But sure enough, and then it wasn't an inch, it was 12 inches, and things were intense. So we'll just see how it all goes. My mind sort of went back to what years ago was on my first real website, and they called it Sharon's favorite sutta, or passage from the Buddha. And it is actually still, I think, my favorite passage from the Buddha, where the Buddha said, abandon or let go of that which is unskillful. You can abandon the unskillful. If it were not possible, I would not ask you to do it. If it would lead to anything but, if it's something I think it was phrased in the negative, if it would lead to more sorrow and tribulation, I would not ask you to do it. But because it leads to happiness and fulfillment, I ask you to do it. And then he went on to say, cultivate the good. You can cultivate the good. If it were not possible, I would not ask you to do it. If it were to lead to more sorrow and suffering, I would not ask you to do it. But because it only leads to more happiness and fulfillment, then I say cultivate the good. So there were a few things that I really loved about that. One, of course, is if it were not possible, I would not ask you to do it. So I considered that a personal promise from the Buddha that, yes, you can do this. And then it's always been interesting for me to look at that kind of schema about life, instead of seeing things, say forces in our own minds or whatever, as good and bad or right and wrong, seeing that there are those which lead to suffering. They lead to our own suffering, they lead to causing suffering for others. And then there are forces which lead to freedom, to connection, to clarity, to love, to joy. And it's a very different way of looking at our own experience and looking at life. If it were not possible, I would not ask you to do it. If it took away from your suffering, from your happiness, and led to more suffering, I would not ask you to do it. And that also brings me to the consideration that our own happiness is considered a positive thing. Not something selfish and self-centered and, kind of pleased with oneself, like lying on the couch thinking, wow, I have it all, something like that. But understanding that our own happiness is like a resource. When I was here, I think much earlier book that I wrote called Real Happiness. And it was interesting because I don't choose the titles of my books by and large. And I didn't choose that one either. And as I had said at the time when I was here, that book actually had a different title originally. It was called Why Meditate? Then I got an advance copy of my friend Matthew Ricard's forthcoming book, and it was called Why Meditate? And his book was coming out in September. Mine was coming out the following January. So it was this big scramble to find another title. And the publisher came out with Real Happiness. And part of it, I was like, that's great. That's what we actually want. And part of me was saying, I don't think so. I'm going to get into trouble for that. And sure enough, the very first interview I had about the book, the interviewer said to me, "Are you trying to tell me that the kind of happiness I experience when I have a lovely meal with my wife isn't real?" And I said, "Of course I think it's real. And if anything, if we paid more attention to it and were more appreciative and were more grateful, we'd be happier." And I said, "And we also know it changes, it disappears. And what about the night you don't like your meal that much?" And what I thought but did not say was, "What about the night you don't like your wife all that much?" So isn't there another kind of happiness that can sustain us, can be there for us, even when circumstances are not meeting our desires, even when we're disappointed, even when we're watching something fade away, even when things are really difficult? And in some ways, this is said to match the actual symbolic quest of the Buddha himself, where in effect he had some very big questions to ask about life. And they were things like, what does it mean to be born in this human body, to be so fragile and dependent, vulnerable to others, and to grow up, to grow old, to get sick, to die, whether we want that or not? And is there a way to have a kind of happiness that it will be sustaining and onward leading, even as the body does its thing? And what does it mean to have a human mind with the kind of emotional chaos that we tend to have? We wake up in the morning and you're afraid, and then you're happy, and then you're sad, and then you're guilty, and then you're frightened, and then you're happy again. And just like, doesn't even take a whole morning, right? Just this cascade of changing feelings, and without the ability to insist that movement stop. Right? We can affect conditions and conditioning and all kinds of things, but we don't seem to have the ability to command. I've grieved long enough, or I'll never be afraid again, or I'll never fall asleep meditating again. It's like not going to be that way. And so is there a kind of happiness that can be there for us anyway, even as the mind on that level is going through all those kind of changes? And it's said that whatever answers or resolutions the Buddha came to, he came to through the power of his own awareness, and so can we. Whatever our own questions are about life and about happiness and so on. One of the things I've also really been taken with around the idea of skillful and unskillful is that, what leads to suffering, what leads to freedom for us. In the end, that's our own investigation. Because we are taught so many things and fed so many myths and even lies about where strength is, how alone we are, what happiness is. Will love strengthen us or weaken us, as an example? Will vengefulness strengthen us or weaken us, is another example. I had this funny experience not too long ago where I kind of semi-ruined this young woman's life for a while. Because I believe we live in a time also where we are taught that if we can only put other people down enough, if we can only demean them enough, we'll feel better about ourselves. So interestingly enough, it's also a time of rampant loneliness. I forget the actual statistic, but it's a phenomenal statistic. This is just the U.S. that the study was done of how many people describe themselves as lonely, whether they're in a relationship or not. And it's a big number. And I think about the kind of contempt we're taught to hold others in. So I was co-teaching this 6-day seminar, and the first night I was speaking about this, and I talked about that rather odd phrase, it's a dog-eat-dog world. And that's what we're taught, right? Don't count on anyone. Don't let anyone take advantage of you. You've got to even if you crush them, it doesn't matter. You've got to do what you have to do to, get ahead and take care of yourself. It's just a dog-eat-dog world. And so this young woman came up to the microphone. She was really shocked. And she said, wow, I've always thought the phrase was, it's a dog world, like D-O-G-G-Y, D-O-G, like puppies and meadows, It's a dog world. And she said, I never knew the phrase was it's a dog world. That's horrible. So we went on for 6 days, and it was the last morning of the retreat. She came up to the microphone right at the end, and she said, I've decided I'm not going to live in a dog-eat-dog world. I'm going to live in a dog-eat-dog world. So what are we taught, though? And one of the almost like miracles of mindfulness is that we have the chance to look directly at our own experience with honesty and with presence and with balance, not with a hidden agenda, like I've got to get rid of that feeling, but to really open to what our experience is, and on the basis of that much more direct connection, see for ourselves. What leads to more suffering? What leads to more freedom? And then we have the choice. When we see that which we know, at least the last 50,000 times it came up, led to more suffering, we have the opportunity to remind ourselves, you know what? See if you can let that go. And we see that which, sometimes very tentative, burgeoning sense of compassion, of caring, of wishing well towards someone, ourselves or someone else. And we see it kind of come alive, trembling, and we think, oh, look at that. I was taught that kind of love or compassion makes you weak or sentimental or foolish or whatever. I don't have to buy into that. I can nurture this. I can strengthen this. I can take some risks and see what happens as I allow myself to care. Things like that. So it's a very empowering thing. And that also makes me think of the work of this friend of mine, Barbara Fredrickson, who's a researcher at the University of North Carolina. And she researches positive states. I don't like to call them positive emotions because I don't think of them all as emotions. But positive states like loving kindness, compassion, equanimity or peace, generosity, gratitude, and so on. And she has this theory, which I've really enjoyed thinking about, called the Fredrickson broaden and build theory. So her thesis is that if you strengthen these positive states, the first effect it will have will be to broaden your perspective, broaden your consciousness. It's like expansiveness, vastness, openness, space. Suddenly we can breathe. Suddenly we see options in front of us where everything just felt shut down and frozen before. It's like, oh, right? And I felt that because I really thought about those times when we're locked into the opposite of those states. I don't mean just a flash of something, but when it has seized us and we're really, really locked into anger, fear, grasping, something like that. If you think about, for example, the last time you were really, really angry at yourself, and just bring it back for a moment, it's not a time when we think, you know what, I said that really stupid thing that morning, but I did 5 great things the same morning. It's like those 5 great things, they're gone. And all that's left is that stupid thing and how that's all we ever do. So one can consider that anger, that first flash of anger, a wake-up call, a signal to look for change, all kinds of things, and it's certainly energizing. But that lockdown, that tunnel vision, means that our ongoing relationship to ourselves or someone else, that our choice of action will be very limited because we're imprisoned by the confines of just the nature of that tunnel vision. That's just it's kind of the characteristic of being lost in a state of anger. And again, there may be very positive things about the feeling in some way, But when we're lost in it, it is consequential in terms of how it affects us and the choices we then make. Or think about the last time you were really, really afraid. It too is not a time where we see many options. It's not like our minds say, oh, you know what? If it doesn't work out this way, maybe it'll work out that way. It's not going to work out. Or even strong grasping or desire. It gives us this incredible tunnel vision. So these days, I like to talk about the fact that I just bought a new car. My car lives in Barre, Massachusetts, wherever I am. And my car, which I was extremely fond of, was getting pretty old. And it still had a cassette player in it. And I really loved that car, but every time I went home to Barre and started driving, it would break down somewhere. So that was clearly a signal. So first of all, it was quite problematic for me to get a new car. I didn't know how to drive a new car. I didn't know how to start a car without a key. I still think if you want to know what's going on behind you, you turn your head. I'm like, what do you mean you look at the screen? So poor friend who was trying to help me get a car, he suffered. But finally, I chose a car. And then the salesman said to me, I need your top 2 color choices. And I am positive I can get you your first choice. Because we look all up and down the eastern seaboard, and it's just like, don't worry about it. But just in case, just a pro forma, I need a second choice. So my first choice was what they were calling mulberry, which is kind of your sweater. It's like a burgundy color. It's the color of Tibetan Buddhist monks' robes. So I had a lot of nice associations with it. I really wanted that mulberry car. And the second choice was like a kind of electric blue. For those of you familiar with Tibetan iconography, it's the color of the medicine Buddha. It's like this electric blue. Lapis, really, is what it is. And I, in ordinary circumstances, really love that color, but I wanted the mulberry. Absolutely. And so the day finally came when the car was delivered, and guess what? It was blue. And I couldn't believe it, like sort of watching my mind, which is always fun, when you can have enough space. It's like, I thought, it's so odd. I'm so upset, and I love that color. In any other circumstance, I'd be so happy to choose something that color, but he told me he could get my first choice. My first choice was mulberry. It's like, oh no. And then I realized that for the first 2 weeks or so of owning that car, if you'd asked me what color it was, I would have said not mulberry. Like, I named a new color. It was like, but right, that's the nature of grasping. It's got to be only this, and only this will ever satisfy me. And look at what we forget. Oh, I actually love that color. Never mind. And so we see that when we are lost in certain states, that's the consequence. That's the suffering, is that they limit us so much. And they close us down and cause such contraction. So it makes a lot of sense to me what Barbara said about certain states broadening, opening, expanding our whole world. And something that I always found very eerie, and I kept confirming because I couldn't quite believe it, was that as people did things like practice these positive states, strengthen them and deepen them, their peripheral vision would actually get better. I thought, whoa, that's really weird. And pretty interesting too, right? Good before a driver's exam, too, to think about. And then the second part of her theory is build. We broaden and build through the cultivation of positive states. So what are we building? We're building a sense of inner resource, a sense of inner abundance, or at least sufficiency, a sense of wholeness. And this, too, is not considered selfish. This is the kind of happiness I was talking about earlier. Because if we feel exhausted, depleted, overcome, broken inside, impoverished inside, there's not an awful lot in us to draw on in order to care about anybody else or take care of anybody else or serve anybody else or try to make a change in this world or even just to listen. You know what it's like in real terms when you are just, you've had it. You feel like there's nothing left inside you and somebody comes and starts telling you their really genuinely sad story and you're like, oh, go away. Please, I just can't. And that is so different from when we feel like we're coming from a place of some resource, right? Presence, wholeness, balance within ourselves, some energy. Same incident, same confrontation, whatever it is, we just can meet it differently. So, and this too, it's really, it's not considered an unfortunate self-indulgence. It's essential. In Buddhist teaching, when they talk about generosity, they talk about material generosity, and that is often examined because it's representative of what we need in order to cultivate non-material generosity or generosity of the spirit, loving kindness, compassion, sympathetic joy, interest, presence, right? They're all kind of acts of generosity. And so it's said in Buddhist teaching that the best kind of generosity comes from some sense of inner abundance, or at least inner sufficiency. And that's why somebody might have maybe a great amount materially by any external measure, but not at all have the inner feeling they even have enough. And it's just very hard in that circumstance to give or to offer. You might, but it's coming from a different place. Maybe obligation or, whatever. It's not that kind of free flow of one's energy. Whereas if there's a greater sense of sufficiency, then there is. It's almost like the flow that is natural or inevitable as our energy moves out and includes and so on. So it's not a wrong thing to be thinking about that sense of resource and how we can cultivate it. We do that in our lives anyway. We're all kind of practicing something. And in fact, I had this really interesting experience when I did, as part of a program for about 4 years through this place called the Garrison Institute, where we brought tools of yoga and meditation and so on to people who were frontline workers in domestic violence shelters. And we would begin each program, programs included both retreats and meetings outside of retreats. And then that cycle would end and we'd start a new one. So we'd begin each one by asking people, and you can do this now as a kind of thought experiment, to take a piece of paper and in the first column to write down the things that they found most stressful about work, because this was a very work-oriented program, but you could just say life, right? What are you finding most stressful in your life? Sometimes that was really interesting examination. It was quite surprising to people too, because since it was work-oriented, maybe it wasn't the kind of fearsome suffering they were confronting every day. It was having, bad communication with coworkers or something like that, which was really weighing on them each day. So what's the most stressful thing in your work or in your life? The second column, we asked people to write down, well, what do you do for a break? What do you do for a sense of replenishment? What do you do for relief? What do you do to lift your spirits? What do you do to connect to something other than the immediate circumstance, something bigger? And, people didn't have to disclose what they were writing or now what you're thinking. But that was a really interesting exercise too. In 4 years of doing the programs, I would say every single person wrote down listening to music, who spoke about what they wrote down, although it was all different kinds of music. And, people might write down, I go out into nature a lot, or I have a deep religious faith, or I drink a lot, actually, to try to get away. And then in the third column, we ask people to look back at that second column. Like, what do you do to get a break? And write down how they felt about what they'd written down. So each item was kind of an interesting reflection. Like maybe people wrote down, I go out into nature. And then you think, well, I really haven't done that in about 7 years. Maybe I should do a little more of that. Or, I stopped doing that. I didn't really need to stop. Maybe I should pick that up again. And if you did write down something like I drink a lot, people were saying, maybe this needs to stop. This really needs to change. I need to find some new tools. And so it was really interesting to see what each person was seeing about themselves, right? We want that sense of relief. We want that sense of connecting to something bigger. Where's it going to come from? Just habit? Or from a willingness to investigate and to stretch and to explore and so on. And so there are a lot of choices there as well. I remember somebody who did read her paper, she said that to get that sense of relief and resilience and so on, she watched a tremendous amount of American Idol. And I just started laughing. I said, oh, I only saw it once. I was at a friend's house, and that kind of made me watch it. And for me, it was like watching continuous rejection. I just felt so much worse at the end of the show. So I say, I guess that won't work for me, So it's not like there's one prescription, for what we might do, but we want to move out of that exhausted, shattered, overcome state. Because in the end, it does not serve anybody, right? And so we can romanticize it a lot, and I think we also do that. Probably the most cliched way of describing it these days is, when you're on a flight and the flight attendant makes the safety announcements and they say, the oxygen masks descend, put your own on first before you try to help anybody else. And I was talking to a writer friend of mine, and I said, I don't think I could use that. Like every one of my teaching colleagues uses it because it's a great example. Every one of them uses it, and every one of my teaching colleagues who writes, they write about it. I said, I just can't even use it anymore. And so my friend who I was talking to said, oh, I was just on a flight, and they made that announcement, and the person sitting in the seat next to me said, I could never do that. I could never put my own oxygen mask on first. So I said to her, maybe I can use it. It's like provocative and difficult and edgy, and put your own mask on first. I was just recently on a flight, of course. It was my flight to California, not my flight back from California. But I was, sitting next to a man, a total stranger, and we immediately kind of signaled, I want to talk to you. So we're both sitting in our seats doing our thing, and then something happened in the plane right above us. It sounded like skidding, or it was some sound that shouldn't have been there. And it was right above us. That was weird. What was that? Like something hit the plane and bounced off, or I don't know, it was weird. And then it happened again. And we were fairly composed. Then it happened a third time, and I jumped. I went, eh! And then we sort of looked at each other, and I thought, if I'm fainting and you're fainting, please put your mask on first. Because can you imagine sitting next to that original woman that my friend told me about, and you're passing out and you need her help, and she's refusing to put her mask on first because some principle, and you really need her to feel okay to help you? That's actually more the reality of things, that we need to look for the things, and we should look for the things that bring us resilience and upliftment and that sense of that kind of happiness, of sufficiency, because that's what will empower us and kind of energize us through all the things that we go through as we're moving forward in life. It's really not selfish. Cultivate the good. You can cultivate the good. If it were not possible, I would not ask you to do it. And so we do examine the states we go through and the effect of various things and choices. And it's a very creative process. It doesn't work, of course, if it's a very judgmental, hypercritical process. But it's a very joyous, creative process to understand that, we can have options. We can see our minds flipping out because the car is mulberry, and we can see that and also laugh rather than feel, oh no, I've been meditating for 150 years and I'm still upset when I get a color that I actually really like. So how do we develop that sense of inner sufficiency, that sense of wholeness? Each of us probably does have our own answer for what we tend to do in life. And then there's just the exploration of what seem to be some universal principles. If we pay attention more to others, we'll feel more connected. And that sense of connection, how like in a lot of clinical analyses these days of different diseases, and they talk about social connection as being a strong healing factor. Interestingly, social connection doesn't necessarily mean lots of people. It's not the number, it's the sense of connection. Right? And so we can cultivate that. And the way we cultivate that is not through pretending or forcing. We cultivate that through paying attention differently. If you're in conversation with someone and you're not really listening and you're not really looking at them and you're just thinking about the email you need to write or something like that, it's not going to be a very connected sense. And I always tend to use that example about meeting a stranger. You meet a stranger at a party or in some situation and they start talking to you and you're really not there. And I was using it in just that way not too long ago, and somebody said, well, you can say the same thing about long-term relationships, whether they're romantic relationships or friendships or whatever. The ways we start thinking, I know all about you. No more surprises left. I don't have to hear you talk. I know how that joke ends, I've heard this before. And we just separate and we close down and we get more and more removed rather than paying full attention. And so it's attention that's really the key to having some greater sense of connection, which will fill us. It will give us that sense of greater and greater abundance. Turning toward the good, the joy of generosity, of gratitude, of loving kindness, which doesn't mean you like everybody, it doesn't even mean you like anybody, but it's acknowledging that our lives are connected. Feeling the possibility of not creating such a strong sense of separation or almost like privilege and marginalization. In a simple way, I was driving in a car with a friend of mine at one point, and we were stuck in this incredible, hideous, terrible traffic. I'm complaining about it all the while. And then at one point, my friend said, oh, we're the traffic too, And it was like so weird. It was like, oh. We've been driving along as though we own the road. This is ours. Other people are in our way. Go away. What are you doing out here at this hour? Right? As though we were in the center of the universe. But what happens when you actually remind yourself, we're the traffic too? That sense of centrality kind of drops out. And then here we are together. This is the truth. We are the traffic too. Other people were complaining about us, I'm sure, as bitterly as we were complaining about them. So it's just that sense of recognition that, oh yes, for all we hold these templates of self and other and us and them, which can be useful, they're just constructs, right? And if we hold them rigidly, we're lost. Because they don't reflect the truth of how things are, which is we're the traffic too. that we live in an interconnected universe where we don't own the road, but we are all counting on one another just to get through a day. And that's actually how things are. So there's every possibility of seeing the suffering of certain states, grasping, hatred, fear, jealousy, that kind of contempt for others, no matter what we're taught, sort of seeing for ourselves. And if we find those states of suffering and contraction and separation and they're not onward leading, we can learn to let go. However often they arise, it doesn't matter. We can learn to let go and so not be so dominated by them. And we can set out to at least experiment to cultivate the good. To see if, of course, loving kindness is my basic example, and I know you're in the middle of Brahmavihara exploration. So, is it really as like sniveling and sentimental and kind of meek and saccharine as we may have been taught? I don't think so, really. But many of us have been taught that. I'm fond these days of talking about my friend Dan Harris. Somebody just brought him up to me, who's an ABC news anchor, and his first book was called 10% Happier. He has another book that just came out, I forget what it's called, and he has this app also called 10% Happier, which I'm on, and Joseph Goldstein's on, a bunch of people. But in 10% Happier, Dan tells the story of he was a news anchor. He was really kind of messed up. He'd been a war correspondent, came back, started taking drugs. He had a panic attack on the air, which is very interesting to watch because as he gave book talks, it kind of followed him. I saw it like a million times. And he ended up, it was suggested to him that he learn to meditate, which he thought was like the stupidest thing in the world. But then he started looking at the science and the research, and he felt somewhat reassured, and then someone suggested he go to an intensive 10-day retreat, which he thought was really stupid. But he went, and to his tremendous chagrin, the kind of biggest experience he had during that retreat was doing loving kindness meditation. So he told me he used to read my book, Loving Kindness, my first book, on the New York City subway, and would hide the cover because he was so embarrassed to be seen reading a book called Loving Kindness. First I thought he meant he put his fingers over the lettering, but then I took a look at the book cover, and those are like big letters, and I realized, no, he hides the cover. It's like pornography or something. And I thought, isn't that interesting? That embarrasses us. Like we might sit on that subway and be reading a book called Pulverize Them Now, or, War Every Minute, or, Don't Let Them Get You, or whatever. And you're like, and we'd feel fine, but loving kindness, oh no, I should hide that. And so we always used to tease each other, because we're friends. And then when his book came out, he posted a loving kindness meditation on abcnews.com. And then he was on, it doesn't even exist anymore, I don't think, he was on this thing called HuffPost Live, where the Huffington Post had live interviews with people. And to prepare for the interview with him, they asked certain people to make recordings, which they would play for Dan on the air, so to speak. And they would get his immediate reaction to the recording. So for some reason, I thought it was a roast. Like nobody said that, but, as it turned out, I was the only one sort of mocking him, and everyone else was like, best person in the world, and like dignified and fantastic, which he is great, and I said, oh, Dan, remember the days when you used to be embarrassed reading Loving Kindness on the subway? And imagine my delight when I saw you posted a Loving Kindness meditation all on your own, and he laughed when they showed him that, and he said something like, Yeah, my wife thanks Sharon Salzberg every single day of our lives because I'm so much less of a jerk, which is the way he talks, But it's the experience of it that leads us to that. It's so easy to just be taken in by what we've been told. Where does strength lie? Where does happiness lie? What good is our happiness anyway? There's so much pain in this world. How dare we be happy? Everything we've been told. And what an amazing thing to be able to just kind of peel that away and see for ourselves where we want to put our life's energy. So I'm going to stop now so we have some time for questions or comments.
Thank you for coming. And I was working at your talk this afternoon, and so I was sort of intimidated about asking a question. But you may have started to answer it, but I'm going to ask it anyway because I'd love to hear you elaborate on it. So I've not been doing this meditation for very, very long, maybe about a year, maybe two. And I haven't done a retreat and all those, like graduate school meditation kind of things. I just come on Tuesday nights and I'm in a little book group too. But so at the end of meditating, we often say, may our meditation benefit all sentient beings. And I'm not sure I get why my sitting still and being quiet, other than like developing resiliency, and that helps everybody, which you've just been saying. But can you elaborate on how my meditating is supposed to help other beings? Thanks.
Well, some of this is really like poetry. It's not like a literal, when we say, may all beings be happy, is that ever going to happen? Probably not. Somebody always says, well, there's predator and prey, and if the predator's happy, the prey is dead. If the prey is happy, the predator's hungry. That is true, but some of it is like poetry in that it evokes a certain sensibility, and it's a reminder to us that, the quote at the end, that our inner work could never really be just for ourselves alone, but is about this sense of connection with all of life. Does it affect somebody energetically or, possibly? I mean, someone's got to put out some better energy in this world, right? And it certainly affects our own choices and our own actions as we do this. It also reminds me what I just said of another book title of mine where many years ago, it was my second book, so right after Love and Kindness, I wrote a book that was called A Heart as Wide as the World. And that wasn't the original title either. The publisher had come up with some title which I can't even remember, but I didn't much like. And I was sitting, and one of my colleagues was giving the talk that night, and she used the phrase, a heart as wide as the world. And I thought, that's it. That's the book I want. So I called my long-suffering publisher at the time, and I said I want to change the title. And we were, well into the process, and they'd already designed a cover for the other title. And they were not really pleased, but finally they gave in to me, and they said, okay. So a heart as wide as the world, of course it implies like openness, expansiveness, like a vista, something like that. So they started frantically designing covers to send me, and this was like send in the mail days. And they sent me this sketch or something of a reproduction of some Van Gogh painting. I don't remember which one, but it was like this big, big open yellow sky. And down at the bottom, there were like a few crumbled huts. And I took a look at it, and I thought it was like a picture of devastation, And I said to a friend, this should be the cover of the Grapes of Wrath or something like that. But I showed it to other people, and I showed it to one friend, I remember, and she looked at it and she said, this is a world that could use some love. And of course, that wasn't the cover, but that phrase has stayed with me for all these years. This is a world that could use some love. And here we are, right? And so, in effect, that's also what we're doing in that moment of dedication. We're reminding ourselves of what we really care about.
Hi, Sharon.
Hi.
A group of us here at a KM group, which we affectionately call the BBC for the Buddhist Book Club. We had the fun of reading your book the last few months and appreciated all the great conversation that you engendered. This question is really kind of an extension of the prior one, is in the traditional metta practice when we offer loving kindness to difficult people and then out beyond to all beings, does it imply action in any way, or to act on that feeling, or is it just a wish? And particularly now that you're in Charlottesville, I thought you might be interested in answering that question.
I think it does not mandate any action. And I think that's an important point for people to, I found that's an important point for people to reflect on. Because if we feel the development of compassion or the opening of our hearts means that we have to do A, B, and C, then we're sunk. You know, and people ask that very question. Does that mean I have to go visit him in jail? As one example. Does that mean I have to go see my mother who is pretty dangerous? You know, does that mean that I have to give them all that money again? Does that mean I have to let them move back in? You know, and so we hear those questions over and over and over again. And really, it doesn't mean that, you know, because the loving kindness we develop is an inner state of freedom of the heart around inclusivity, around care, around recognition that our lives have something to do with one another. And we know there's such a thing as tough love, there's such a thing as fierce compassion, right? And it's almost like there are two different aspects of an action. It's like, you know, we talk a lot in the Buddhist tradition or many Eastern traditions about the motivation behind an action, the intention behind an action as being a very, very important part of the action. It's like if I reach down for this cup and handed it to somebody, all anybody sees is my hand moving down, picking up an object and moving it forward. But the question is, what's the heart space that's generating that? You know, maybe I'm offering it to you because I like you and I want you to have it, or maybe I see you have a water bottle and I think, well, hey, you know, like if I give you the cup, maybe you'll give me the water bottle, or maybe I don't like you and I think, well, you know, you won't like this tea. Here, have a cup. You know, so it's like the same smile and the same gesture, but it's coming from a totally different place. So in the West, we tend to, you know, mock really or just be indifferent to the force of the intention. It's like the road to hell is paved with good intentions, or what do you mean you had a good intention? You completely screwed up. But in the East, the intention is a very important part of the action because it's what will distinguish this action from this action, which looks absolutely identical on the surface. And so they say that's where the karmic seed is planted. That's where like the energy of the action is. And then we have the next aspect of an action is like the skillfulness or the unskillfulness of the execution. It means mindfulness of a bigger context. It means discernment. It means remembering lessons learned. It means learning from feedback. It means learning skills, things like that. So, you know, if you are supervising, for example, someone at work, it doesn't take long to realize it's not that skillful to say to them, you're an idiot, you know? Because for one thing, it's not giving them any information they would need should they choose to change. It's much more skillful to say, when you turned in the memo 6 weeks late, then, you know, 3 people couldn't go on vacation. Actions are really consequential, whatever. We learn skills. And so that's why there's no perfect formula. You know, the only loving action is to say yes or to do this. It's based on I call it our best guess in the moment. It's always contextual, right there in that relationship. Do you let that kid move in again? I don't know. And it's a kind of discernment that really needs to get developed, including having a wider range, I think, of options, rather than being so locked into the habituated stance. And those are different. Every time we conflate them, the motivation with the skillfulness of the execution, we end up in some kind of trouble. That's like saying a loving person could only do this or do that or respond in that way. And it's much too limiting.
I have a question about the blue and the burgundy. I've been meditating maybe a year or maybe two. I don't know. I come here every Tuesday night, and I have this mind that goes a lot. So I sit every day, but I don't always make it. I mean, I just sometimes can't settle my mind. So I'm new at this. But anyway, and I've read a few books on Pima children and so on. And anyway, then I'm thinking it'll get better. I'll get better, and I'll be able to not get hooked so easily. And then I hear you've written books, and you've been doing it all these years. And what you said about the blue and the burgundy, I can so identify with that. And by the way, I do have a new car, and it's metallic blue. And that was my first choice, and I got it. But you know what?
I'm extremely happy for you.
I don't really think I'm any happier, actually, because there's this about it I don't like. It's too low, and just little things. But doesn't it get better? I mean,
Yeah. No, I mean, you said it really well originally. There's a difference between having something arise and getting hooked on it. A lot of things can arise, and it's either, the more poetic imagery in Tibetan practice is see the thoughts and feelings that come up like clouds moving through the sky. Or you could say, I'm watching the new car movie, I'm just watching the movie. Or as one of my teachers would say, it's not the thoughts that arise that are the problem, it's the glue. We take things to heart. I don't want anyone to see my car. It's like, it's the wrong car. I need a new car. Maybe if I'd gotten the Mazda instead of the Honda, it could be mulberry. If only I had a mulberry car, I would never feel unhappy again. I'd have everything, That's the problem. Not just the kind of scenarios coming through. And that's why we say sometimes that mindfulness is a matter of relationship. It's not about what's happening, it's about how we're relating to what's happening. Maybe sleepiness comes up and we're kind of interested in it, or we're more balanced with it, or restlessness comes up and we're kinder to ourselves with it. We're more balanced there. Or, restlessness or sleepiness come up and we freak out. Like, I can't believe this is happening. This is the only thing I'll ever experience when I meditate, ever. That's a different relationship.
So last summer, we really suffered a huge community trauma, or at least I've kind of come to think of it as a community trauma. And there's a lot of folks in Charlottesville that over the course of the summer put their body on the line and in so many different ways in response to what happened last year. And I think a lot of people are really suffering and their bodies still from that. And the trauma doesn't really end either. And I think there are people like myself who are white and are suddenly aware of the trauma that people that are Jewish or people of color are suffering on a regular basis and feel kind of incensed and called to respond in some way. But the response itself is continues to be a trauma. And I guess what I'm wondering is how you hold that and do what you were speaking of before, of kind of filling your cup. Like, how do you do both of those things? I don't know if that makes sense, but
I think so. I'll try anyway. I don't know that trauma needs to be considered a permanent state for one thing, in its meaning of like being frozen and kind of held by something. I mean, terrible, terrible things happen. A terrible thing happened here. And we're affected by that. So I don't mean to say we kind of dismiss it or it goes away, but sometimes it's sort of like more metabolized, and used in some way. I mean, you already talked about that, using it for action, using it for waking up to the conditions of other people. And I specifically talked about like replenishing and all that because I know so many activists who, as one said to me like a million years ago, he said, I can't even let myself eat a banana and enjoy it. And I said, really? And he said, yeah, and I just know too much, And I thought, and he also was an extremely depressed person. And I thought, well, and his activism was beautiful. And I thought, well, maybe you should let yourself enjoy a banana now and then, and like you'd have more energy in the long run to try to sustain a change. So it's both. I mean, it's shocking, and awful. So many things, really, in our time, and yet, I think it's really it's up to each person to kind of find what will help them go on in a way that is productive and useful. And some of that, I am sure, has to be a kind of more holistic vision. So, for example, I was once speaking, it was actually in D.C. at the cathedral, the National Cathedral, and the woman that was speaking before me was Zainab Salbi, who had started this organization, Women for Women International, which linked up people here with women in war-torn countries, and we would actually correspond, and they took some money off your credit card every month or whatever. But she said something I found very interesting. She said that because she was also, when she'd come back from, say, Afghanistan, she would be fundraising for the organization. And she said she found herself telling the story of this woman in Afghanistan and the horrible things she'd been through and how terrible it was and how awful it was. And then she said, and I realized one day that I never said she was an attorney. And she had education. And she had resources. And she had strengths. It's like I had made her into this kind of only victim, object. And she said, I really didn't do service to her. And she said, I really began to consider what compassion is. And that maybe to have a more truthful view of the complexity of who she was. And be conveying that was more to the point than just kind of, instigating that same reaction over and over and over again. Or the ways we feel guilt over our own joy. And I can understand that. There's a lot of suffering in this world. And yet, is it actually going to be the case that we will be able to hang in there and respond without just going under if we just only, have that kind of response? And so I'm not totally sure that, again, that the exact traumatic reaction is always going to be sustained, nor should it be. I mean, I went through 9/11 in New York, basically. I was not in New York City that day, but I was on my way there, actually, because I had a class that night. It was Tuesday. And when I finally got into the city, which was about a week later, I stayed for 2 months and taught. And I feel like I lived through a lot, and I grew a lot in that period. And, I saw the kind of precise physiological reactions of my friends. A siren would go by and they'd leap out of their seats and things like that. That all eased, as people worked. But the caring and the conviction didn't go away, and the ability to be truthful about what had happened didn't go away. So I also feel like we live in a time where truth is hard to come by. It's not that easy. And if you have, say, a childhood that was full of deception of some kind, or secrets, or silence around certain things, it's a very kind of re-traumatizing experience. And so, people have to decide for themselves what will help them kind of steer their way through, rather than just kind of perpetuate those old reactions, which are only suffering and are not onward leading. And so, how much news do you look at? I don't know. I made certain decisions. And, I am frankly on Twitter about 20 hours a day, so it's not that I don't know what's going on, but I don't watch it on television. I decided, I can't do that right now. There's something else I need to be doing in my life every day, like being here, and so if I was like all freaked out because it wouldn't help. But I am on Twitter all the time, so you can always find me there. It's at Sharon Salzberg. And it's really me, too. The movement toward balance is not a selfish movement. It really isn't. And it's hard to believe that. Maybe I'll just close with this one other story from my time with the domestic violence shelter workers, which I think I've actually told this story here before, but when we did this program, it started with frontline workers, and then the directors and supervisors of shelters said they wanted a program too, and so we did a kind of parallel program for them. And they came up with a phrase on their own to describe what they wanted to help institute in the workplace. So this is a very intense workplace, remember? And their phrase was a culture of wellness. They wanted to help establish a culture of wellness. And a culture might mean your body and mind, it might mean your desk, it might mean your team, it might mean your classroom, whatever the scope of that is. And they each had different suggestions about what they would do or try to do to help establish a culture of wellness. Interestingly, everybody talked about some physical space at the workplace where people could just chill and relax. Some people talked about growing a rooftop garden or whatever. And this one woman who was running a shelter said, I've decided that in order to help establish a culture of wellness, I'm going to start taking a lunch break. And everybody in the room who did not work at a shelter was aghast. And we all said, you don't take a lunch break? Isn't it in your contract? And she said, oh, it's in my contract, but there's never enough time. There's so much crises and, craziness, and everybody needs me, and there's so much pressure, and there's so much suffering. But then she said, I realize now, though, I can't go on unless I do something to try to shift this balance. So I'm going to take a lunch break. And because we were meeting in New York City in between retreats, we got to kind of hear about her progress. So the first time she came back, she said it didn't work. She said, I closed the door, but somebody crouched down and looked through the keyhole. And they saw that I was in there, so I didn't get a lunch break. And then the second time, maybe 3 weeks later, she came back and she said, it worked. She said, I closed the door and I turned off the lights. And I got a break. And my assumption about that whole journey was that very possibly the hardest part of all was realizing she deserved it, that she needed it, and that it was okay to do. Because in fact, it doesn't blow up our to-do list, and it doesn't mean we give in, and it doesn't mean we're apathetic, but we are finding other sources of strength and support in order to really go on. Okay, so I'm going to thank you. Thank you. Here's Pat. Thank you, Pat. I hope to come back sometime soon. We'll see what happens. I don't have to wait for another book, right?